Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in the Gospel of John, chapter 18, and Jesus has been arrested, and now he's going to go through the trial. John gives us a little condensed version of these events, but he also gives us a different perspective. Some of the same, no doubt the same uh, events, but a little different perspective, which is what I always like about um, how the different four Gospels. When you think about the four Gospels, um, they're kind of told from different perspectives. So imagine you had a four-way stop sign. So if you had a four-way stop sign and you saw an accident, you can get four different views. Same accident, but you're going to see one from east, you're going to see one from west, one from the north, and one from the south. So the events is the same, but then what will happen is they may tell different details. So this is kind of where we are with the gospel. So let's jump into it, and we're going to pick it up at verse number, where are we going to pick it up at? Verse 28. All right, so we're going to pick it up at verse 28. Now, I did say what was interesting, how Peter denied the Lord. And I think it's important to understand that Peter's denial, Luke gives us one of the most chilling, I'm going to say chilling, recordings of it. Chilling from the standpoint, Jesus had told Peter that he was going to deny him, and then he said, all of you all are going to forsake me. And Peter just denied it, even arguing with the Lord, which kind of tells you the mindset. Here is Jesus, whom Peter had established in his mind that he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He established that. And yet when Jesus tells him he's going to deny him, instead of Peter saying, Lord, I don't want to deny you. How could I stop that? He argues with him. In other words, basically, Jesus, you're lying, or Jesus, you're wrong. I'm not going to deny. And as we see here, he does. And then Luke records that, so they're out in the temple court. Kind of give you a quick picture of that. They're out in the temple court. So you got the temple and what's called the temple complex. So you got the temple, but then within the walls, is this huge plaza. And there's different things on the plaza. And then you have various courts. Let me see if I can kind of show you that white quick. I didn't plan on that, so I got to scroll up. Y'all can't see this, but I got slides here that when I show, so, and since I did not prepare for it, I think this is it here. No. Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is kind of a little picture here. So here's how, in a sense, it would look from another angle, the walls of the temple. And then as you can see, there are different things that's going on in the plaza, right? In the plaza. And so, the only the priests would go into the temple, but then everybody else would be out in the plaza. Now, when Jesus was arrested, he was somewhere out on the plaza, and then he was sitting out on the plaza, And then um, we'll go back now. When Peter denied him, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. So he was right there. That's what makes that kind of astounding. All right. So verse 28, it says, then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. Now, as I said, there was actually kind of two hearings before. They took him to Annas, and then they took him to Caiaphas, and then they took him to Jesus. These were kind of kangaroo courts. The Jews could not execute anyone. Rome did not give them that law, even though they had certain freedom. They had temple police. They could do certain things under the law. And then ultimately, in this case, when it becomes serious, they brought him before Pilate. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters themselves, otherwise they would defile and be unable to eat the Passover. Now, again, I have to kind of tell you the hypocrisy of the Jews here. And this is kind of religion. This is religion. See how, notice, here they are so, particular to obey the law, right? They're not going to go into the Gentiles' court because that would defile them, even though the law doesn't say that. For the priests, yes. Now, the Pharisees, I don't know if they were considered priests. But their whole thing was, and this is because of the religion, the corruption of religion. But think about this. Here they are thinking, I am not going to go into the Gentiles' court because I would be defiled and I wouldn't be able to celebrate the Passover, at the temple. Now, under the law, you could, if you, for example, if you touched a dead body, you was defiled. You couldn't celebrate the Passover that way. You couldn't go into the temple complex. But now think about this. They had just lied. They had just framed, or they are framing an innocent man whom they know to be innocent, and yet in their minds they think God is going to be pleased with us because we're not going to defile ourselves by going into the temple court. So, verse 29, then Pilate came out to them. Now, let me just say this. Pilate was irritated. The Jews, the Romans, they wasn't that fond of the Jews. So the fact that he had to come out to them probably irritated him. Then Pilate came out to them and said, what charge do you bring against this man? They answered, if this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed over to him. They lied. And that's what I'm saying. They're liars, and yet at the same time, they're going to be so particular to obey the Passover. Verse 31, so Pilate told them, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. And he says, it is not legal for us to put anyone to death, the Jews declared. They said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, signifying what kind of death he was going to die. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, are you king of the Jews? Now, this was the kind of question that he was asking, because again, if he was the king, if he was going to lead a revolt, that would be treason. That you'll be crucified for that. Jesus answered, are you asking this of your own, or have others told you about me? I'm not a Jew, am I? Pilate replied. Your own nation and chief priest handed you over to me. What have you done? Now, notice the question here. By the way, Pilate knew that the Pharisees were full of it. Just so we're clear, Pilate knew that the Pharisees, and what testimony is that? He knew they're crooked. They know they're crooked. But Pilate was in so history tells us, Pilate was in a very precarious place because One, he was in trouble with Rome, so he had his own issues. So he couldn't afford this kind of, if things got out of hand here in Jerusalem. So that's why he's kind of tap dancing here. Verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world, said Jesus. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. Well, Peter did try, okay. As it is, my kingdom does not have its origins here. You are a king then? Pilate asked. You say that I'm a king, Jesus replied. I was born for this, and I've come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. And everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. What is truth? Pilate said. Right? So what is truth? Okay, what is truth? Kind of a, and this is a good question. I don't know. I detect sarcasm. What is truth? But notice he first asked him. He says, "Now, you are a king." That's what you're telling me. You're telling me you're a king. In other words, Pilate was. He might have been trying to find a reason to appease the Jews, and that would have been that way. But as it stands, as you listen to Jesus, you would say, okay, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. He said, you say that I'm a king. Jesus replied, I was born for this. I've come into the world, and for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who of the truth listens to my voice. Then what is truth? Now, philosophically, is that a good question? What is truth? Now, you hear the phrase today where people will say, this is my truth. Now, they're not saying it here, but you hear people say that today. This is my truth. And truth is reality. That's how you define truth, right? Truth is reality. So you start that's the baseline. You start with reality. So to say my truth, it's not truth. You're using the wrong phrase because it is reality. So here's reality, right? 2 plus 2 is 4. That's reality. And let me see here. Oops, sorry guys, I lost something there, but okay, here we go. All right, so back to truth. Okay, I kind of lost something anyway. So back to truth. What is truth? And so 2 plus 2 is 4. Now that's reality. Now how do we know that? First, we start off with grammatics. We go language, right? So if I go and say, okay, here's 1, 2, and then 1, 2. So here's the reality. 2 will equal 4. Okay, so that's reality. We can establish that on many levels. As I said, language, grammatics, and then okay. So 2, 2, and then you can say that's what it's for. Now, if language kind of came in and said 2 plus 2 is 5, okay, fine, we could have said 5. But it was already established. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 equals 4 equal parts, or 4 different parts. That's all. So that's truth. So when we get to more, of course, impactful things, what is truth? Well, truth is the word of God. Jesus already told us what truth is. He said, thy word is truth. And remember, John tells us that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So Jesus is truth. Jesus is the reality. And we can get a lot deeper into that as far as, again, what is truth? But it's certainly not in the eye of the beholder. Okay, it's not in the all right. So Pilate, I think, is asking this question, kind of, half, kind of half. What is truth? Half. So, all right. after he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, I find no grounds for charging him. Now, in any other situation, this would be an indictment on the Pharisees. In other words, in any other legal system, this should have ended. In other words, this is what you all brought me. I question him. I find no grounds for charging him. But now here's the reality. Look at what he said. You have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? And they shouted back, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a revolutionary. Now, Barabbas wasn't, now the Jews, and this is again, kind of go back, this is in a sense, this is Pilate's kind of worst nightmare. And the reason why is because, notice what he asked first. He kind of tried to lead them on, and he wasn't expecting this. And by the way, I think no one could have expected this because, remember, Jesus has said, and for this, the Gospel of Luke tells us. So he comes along and he says that the I kind of lost my train of thought here, but he said not Barabbas. I'm talking about Barabbas. I lost my train of thought. Pilate was saying Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. But at the same time, he couldn't afford beef with the Pharisees. Now, here is the one thing. So Luke's gospel tells us it's more intense. This scene is very condensed. I told you John giving us a condensed, but this and Luke give us a lot more detail. And this is very condensed. They were shouting. And basically, Pilate is wringing his hands saying, I don't know what's going on. But we also know that this was driven by the forces of darkness, Satan himself. And so logic is out of the place. He couldn't understand. When he said, do you want me to lead you to the King of Jews? That should have been logical. That should have been, okay, great. And yet, they are, he's tripped out. Now, of course, we don't get this here, right? But I mean, notice they said they shouted back. And they kept shouting this. And notice what they were shouting. When he said that Barabbas was a revolutionary, these Jews, and that's what I was going to say before I lost my thought, the zealots were always a thorn in Rome's side. Not so much of a thorn either, because they wasn't even that powerful, but like flies. They would revolt. They were trying to overthrow the government, but yet they were proverbially bringing knives to gunfights. And they would lose every one of them. And that's how he ended up getting arrested. Barabbas got arrested because he, and then he ended up committing murder. And so he was going to be crucified. And so what is going on here is Pilate is like, why are you picking a murderer over an innocent man? This man is innocent. Why are you picking a murderer? And that's what makes then all of this so crazy, because they were shouting, the crowd, and notice the crowd, and then the crowd was instigated by the Pharisees. But yet the Pharisees, remember, they didn't want to go into the Gentile course. They didn't want to be defiled, right? They didn't want to be defiled. So, but anyway, it's crazy. But all right, guys, we're going to pick this up next time in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.